Also remember to state your name. The Transportation Committee has received a request from council approval. Transportation line that states to both be in this meeting. Made this request in compliance with the requirements of the Meetings Act. This request requires an authority vote of this body. Those in favor say aye, those not in favor say nay. So all those in favor? Aye. Any nays? All right, that vote. I'd like to ask committee members at the table to introduce themselves, and we'll start with Madam Chair, your representative.
Megan Swanson, Mary Nichols, Christina Kapowski,
McHenry County. Iowa Whitehead, RPA.
Director of Transportation for the McHenry County Division of Transportation, serve as Vice Chair. We look forward to working with you and with Scott, he's not here today, of course, pending MPO approval. Assuming approval in January, Tara and Scott will begin serving in their new roles at the first Transportation Committee meeting of 2026 in February. But we're not done with you, Kevin. I want to take a moment to thank you for your leadership and service to this committee. Uniquely, in Kevin's case, he graciously stepped in early when the chair seat was vacated early. So he actually has served for more than 2 years and for the full tenure of my being here at CMAP. So just a little bit of review, tenure and review. Over the past 2 years, Kevin has been a steady, thoughtful presence, always prepared, deeply engaged, and genuinely interested in hearing from committee members, staff, and the public. He consistently made time to talk through agenda items in advance, anticipate questions, and ensure discussion was productive, inclusive, and meaningful. Kevin guided this committee through a period of a lot of transition, from virtual meetings to our current hybrid format, changes in leadership, evolving procedures, and the occasional behind-the-scenes curveball. I think we had some special meetings called a few times too. And he did all of this with grace, good humor, and an easygoing style that put everyone at ease. And of course, he never lost sight of trying to keep our meetings efficient, especially for Lollapalooza ticket holders. We thank you for that. On behalf of CMAP staff, thank you, Kevin, for your dedication, leadership, and partnership. It has truly been a pleasure working with you. We look forward to continuing to work with you as you remain an active member of this committee and MPO. Please, if you could all join me in giving Kevin a round of applause. Do you want to say anything?
Yeah, I guess just real quick, I think Amy said a lot of things there, and I think that was, I came in here, and there's a lot of new faces here too, a lot of familiar ones that have been around for a while, but there was that newer committee, and I think together we navigated a lot of big things. We had the safety action plan and the long range plan, and a lot of stuff going on that with new committee, new faces, and we did it together, and I think we made a lot of good progress together. So thank you all for supporting me and being patient while I'm kind of learning the ropes up here, and it's been a lot of fun, and looking forward to jumping back to the county side of the table and letting Scott come up here and join with Tara. It'll be you guys will be in good hands with Scott and Tara. They're awesome. Unless we scared Scott off already, I don't know. But no, thank you everyone. I appreciate it, and thanks for the kind words, Amy.
Great, thank you, Kevin. So moving on to regular updates, I want to flag a timely implementation update related to county safety action plans this committee adopted earlier this year. CMAP, in partnership with the DuPage Division of Transportation, has released a recorded webinar focused on funding traffic safety improvements, which is now available on CMAP's homepage. While the webinar centers on DuPage County, it also provides general funding guidance that is relevant to communities across the region that have a safety action plan. It walks through federal, state, and regional funding sources and addresses key issues like project eligibility and what makes a strong application. Fittingly, CMAP is also hosting live office hours later today from 1 to 2 p.m. to answer any follow-up questions from our local partners. On the legislative update side, I'd be remiss to not mention that this past Tuesday, Governor Pritzker signed SB 2111 into law, enacting significant transit funding and governance reforms. This formalizes a major milestone for for transit in our region. And I have to say, it was so nice to see so many of our region's leaders standing together, unified at that event. And then from time to time, project-specific questions come before this committee. So I want to highlight that as CMAP is made aware of project-related public input meetings and engagements, we make an effort to share that out on our website. These public engagement opportunities help ensure that important feedback is shared early in the project development process so that feedback can be more meaningfully considered before projects get too far along in later stages. So if you're interested, just go to CMAP's website. If you go to the right-hand side, you'll see a calendars tab, and that will give you an idea of some of the upcoming meetings that are happening across the region. Probably won't be too many over the holidays, but as we get warmer, you'll probably see that calendar fill up. Finally, a reminder at our next meeting will be Friday, February 27th. I and the entire CMAP team extend a sincere gratitude to all of you around the table for another great year of invaluable collaboration. We wish you all a safe, enjoyable holiday season. So with that, I'll turn things back over to you.
Thank you, Amy. All right, moving on to item 5.01. Russell is here to provide us with an overview of the fiscal year 2023 through 2028 Transportation Improvement Program amendments. Good morning, Russell.
All right, good morning. Included in your packet today are the 55 formal tip changes shown on Tip Amendment 25-02 and the 129 tip changes shown on Administrative Amendments 25-02.1 and 25-02.2. Formal amendments resulted in an increase of $249.2 million in total project costs for all prior, current, and future years. Here are a few highlights. Metra kept us busy. Metra submitted 61 tip changes, so almost a full third of all the tip changes and more than half of the formal tip changes. So Metra decided that this was the opportunity to update their program and to adjust funding as marks keep changing at the RTA. CDOT added roughly $20 million for a Safe Streets for All grant that was awarded to them for work on the North Avenue project. And as you may have noticed in the packet, there's a new project from IDOT for District 3 on US 6 in Grundy County. On paper, this would appear to be a large capacity adding project. However, what IDOT is actually doing at this time is just starting the phase one. It's going to take several years for them to get through that to see what they may need to do in the corridor in response to a very large CN logistics center that is currently being developed in the area, which is why all the funding other than E1 is in MYB in the tip. Should this project progress quicker than anticipated, they are aware that they would need to go through the RCP process and the conformity process, but they do not anticipate getting finished with phase one for 4 to 5 more years. So at which time we'd be doing the next plan update. Administrative amendments reduced total cost by $92.6 million in the tip in all prior, current, and future years. The net change for total costs in the tip from all amendments resulted in $156.6 million being added. I need to make a correction. Sorry. Let me go back and learn how to read. Administrative amendments reduced, and I literally have it in bold, reduced total cost by $92.6 million in the tip in all prior, current, and future years. The net change for the total cost in the tip from all amendments resulted in $156.6 million being added to the tip in all prior, current, and future years. Cost changes comprised most of the formal changes, while administrative amendments were primarily changes in funding sources and cost changes below the formal thresholds. Accounting for the amendments presented to you today, the tip remains physically constrained. The amendments were posted on December 12th for committee and public review. Approval of formal tip amendment 26-02 is requested, and after the motion has been made, I can answer any questions if there are any.
Great. Thank you, Russell. I will entertain a motion to approve tip amendment 26-02.
Second. Heidi Files.
Motion? Sorry.
Sorry, I motion.
You're good. You got the motion. Do we have a second? Second, McHenry County. All right. Any questions or discussion for Russell? Yes, Audrey.
I just had 3 projects. They're all IDOT projects that I just had a couple questions if you wouldn't mind. There is a bridge over I-290 at Laramie Avenue, and it's close to the CTA Cicero station on the Forest Park branch. Could you explain if there are any pedestrian improvements in that project?
Yes, that includes widening the sidewalks from 7 feet to, I think we got a little bit over 10 on the sidewalks. And yeah, it includes bike and ped. Yes.
Awesome. Okay. Also, there is on the Skokie Highway from Quasney Avenue south, there's a road expansion near Waukegan Road, which does not have sidewalks. Is there pedestrian improvements included into that project?
Yes, there is. That's otherwise known as 41 at 176 interchange. We're kind of revamping that old 1950 style interchange that doesn't have good bike and ped accommodations. Bike and ped are provided from Waukegan all the way through, including that intersection and up and down the legs. Yes.
Great, thank you. And then the last one, US 6 from east of Mission Parkway to Morris, in Morris to I-55. This is a road expansion. It's just west of the DuPage River, and I'm wondering if there are any pedestrian connections that would connect it to the Illinois-Michigan Canal Trail.
Before Steve answers that, it is in District 3.
Okay.
So Steve is District 1. If you want to answer, you can, but we have had numerous conversations with District 3. They haven't even started the project.
Okay.
So in terms of when they go to start and scope any project, they are going to consider and look at all pedestrian, bicycle accommodations, trail connections. All of that is part of their phase 1 scoping, but they haven't even hired a consultant yet, so they haven't started
Okay.
anything. I don't know if you have anything to add, Steve.
Yeah, a portion of that project's on our side, and I think that connection might be on our side. So we'll make sure to make that comment if it's not there. But yeah, usually any ad lane includes bike and ped accommodations, but they haven't gotten to the alternatives yet. So more to come on that study. That's just study.
All right. Yes, Henry.
And in addition, Kane County submitted capacity additions on I-90, Randall over I-90. And kind of exciting, I think, is the end of the Pace Line, Randall Road Bus Station. They've carefully considered the sidewalk connections and crosswalks from the station on the north side of Jane Addams Tollway to the employment centers on the south side of the tollway. Just because I was thinking of you. And so made sure to review the whole corridor. There's partial sidewalks there and the additional connections to where you can see large employers like a hospital and things. So I'm excited to see that project continue forward as well.
And just to add context, nearly every single project that's in the tip, unless it's on the expressway or something like that, bicycle and pedestrian accommodations are just standard fare for every project in terms of including looking at them for every single project. We're working with our implementers to update the work types so that they better reflect all the different aspects of it. Just because it's not in the tip, though, as a work type or listed in the description, I just want to make sure everybody knows that it is very rare that a project does not have bicycle pedestrian accommodations or ADA improvements associated with it. And as we move to the new platform, we'll be better able to represent that stuff.
All right, any other questions or comments for Russell on this item? All right, we have a motion and a second, so all those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, Russell's got one more for us.
All right, I got one more.
5.02. Russell will stay with us now and provide an overview of the 2023 through 2028 TIP conformity analysis and TIP amendment 26-03 and seek approval.
All right. Included in your packet today is the onto 2050, 2023 to 2028 TIP conformity amendment 26-03. The CMAP region, as you know, is a non-attainment area for ozone. Thus, we are required under the Clean Air Act to demonstrate that projects in the TIP conform to the motor vehicle emissions budget for our area through a regional emissions analysis. As shown in the memo, 2 new projects along with changes to 8 previously conformed projects were included in the emissions analysis for this amendment. Projects in the TIP subject to air quality analysis requirements must demonstrate when modeled that the region does not exceed our motor vehicle emissions budget. And as shown at the end of the memo in your packet, the region does not exceed the motor vehicle emissions budget for VOCs and for NOx, which are our 2 required pollutants. The conformity amendment was released for a 30-day public comment period that ended yesterday, during which no comments were received. The conformity amendment, CMAP's emissions modeling process, and regulatory requirements were discussed at the Tier 2 interagency consultation meeting on December 6th, and the members there were supportive of the process and procedures that CMAP uses for emissions modeling and the conformity process. At this time, CMAP staff requests approval recommending the onto 2050 2023 to 2028 TIP conformity analysis and TIP amendment 26-03 to the MPO Policy Committee. And after the motion has been made, if there are any questions, I can answer them at that time.
Great, thank you, Russell. I will entertain a motion to approve TIP amendment 26-03.
Moved by
Heidi?
Kane County.
Do I have a second? Second, Will. Any questions or discussion for, yes, Heidi, go ahead.
I want to say thank you to Russell for walking us through the addition to the non-exempt projects for Randall at I-90 especially. It was very helpful, and especially with the new.
Make sure the record reflects that.
That's it. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Russell. Moving right along to item 5.03, Hayden Horton is here to present a summary of the draft fiscal year 2027 Unified Work Program and seek recommendation for MPO Policy Committee approval at the meeting in early January. Good morning, Hayden.
Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Hayden Horton. I'm a TIP analyst here at CMAP. Today, I'm here to request the committee's consideration and a recommendation for MPO Policy Committee approval of the draft FY 2027 Unified Work Program. If you could hit the next slide for me, please.
Sorry, Hayden, if you can maybe speak up or adjust the
yeah.
mic just a little bit. Yeah,
Sure. How's that?
perfect. Yeah,
Okay,
thank
good.
you.
And one more slide. Sorry. Okay, great. The UWP documents transportation planning activities that are required of CMAP as an MPO. The UWP provides an activity level budget for federal metropolitan planning funding and includes a description of the work to be completed, who's executing the work, and a time frame for completion. If you can hit the next slide, please. The work outlined in the UWP is completed by CMAP staff and our regional partners through 2 programs. The core program is developed annually and generally includes ongoing planning tasks required to fulfill federal requirements. The competitive program is a 5-year program developed biannually and is used to fund one-time planning studies or projects that complement the MPO's required work. You can read more about both these programs and the activities eligible for funding in the Unified Work Program Development Methodology, which is linked in the memo. Next slide. For FY 27, these 2 programs combined total just under $35 million. It's allocated to the agencies shown here and described in more detail in the draft UWP document that's attached. As noted here and throughout the document, the total funding to be allocated to CMAP is around $28.3 million. However, the allocation between personnel expenses and allocations to specific activity categories are preliminary. These totals will be finalized with CMAP board approval of the agency's comprehensive budget, which we anticipate in February. Next slide, please. All right, so this slide shows the draft core budget by activity. This budget was developed with proposals received from 15 external agencies and holding CMAP's activity level allocations similar to our FY 26 allocations. This is a 5.6% increase over FY 26 for our external partners, and then a 2.8% increase over FY 26 for CMAP's internal budget. As is typical for our region, the majority of our transportation planning funds are allocated for developing and implementing our long-range plan. The next slide, please. Rounding out the FY 27 UWP draft is the competitive program. Shown here is the full 5-year program. So that FY 27 column represents the portion of the program included in the FY 27 budget. For the FY 27 competitive program, we received 3 eligible applications requesting approximately $1 million across FY 27, 28, and 29. In addition to the projects awarded funding in this year's competitive program, you'll also see on there a project for Metro, as they were awarded $241,500 in FY 27 in our previous 5-year program. More detailed information about each of the projects is included in the draft of the FY 27 UWP, which is included in your packet. In terms of next steps, with the recommendation of this committee, the draft FY 2027 UWP will be presented to the MPO Policy Committee in January 2026 for approval. Following CMAP board approval of CMAP's comprehensive budget in February, the draft UWP will be updated to reflect the final personnel and expense allocations, and that final version of the document will be presented to the MPO Policy Committee for final approval at their March 2026 meeting. And that's all I have. Thank you so much for your time. I'd be happy to take any questions.
All right, thank you, Hayden. Before we open it up to questions and discussion, I guess let's get this item on the floor. So I'll entertain a motion to approve the fiscal year 2027 UWP for recommendation to MPO. Check. I have a second. Second. All right. Any questions or discussion items? All right. Seeing none, I'll take a vote. All those in favor? Any opposed?
Aye.
Motion carries. Awesome.
Thank
Great
you.
job, Hayden. Thank you. All right, item 5.04, Richard is here to present the 2026 Transportation Committee meeting dates for approval. Good morning, Richard.
Morning, got to move this up. Good morning, everyone. The proposed 2026 Transportation Committee meeting dates were brought forth at last month's committee meeting. As you may remember, just for your information, we're now bringing them back around requesting approval. The memo in your packet outlines all the dates, but they're all Fridays at 9:30, just like we had in 2025. So this may be familiar to you, but yeah, we're requesting approval. And I'll take any questions. Otherwise, kick it over to Kevin.
Great, thank you, Richard. I'll entertain a motion to approve the 2026 Transportation Committee meeting dates. Jack, and then second, Mayor. All right, any questions for Russell or Richard? Sorry. All right, seeing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thanks, Richard. All right, moving along to item 6.01. Our Regional Transportation Plan team are back with an update for us. Ryan Tomto, Elizabeth Ginsburg will update us on the plan progress, the revised fiscal constraint, and share the draft list of constrained regional capital projects. Good morning, Ryan.
Good morning. Again, yeah, my name is Ryan Tomto, Principal Policy Analyst. Use he, him pronouns. And again, the focus of today's presentation is largely focused on the updates to the financial plan, as well as the proposed list of constrained projects. On the next slide, we have a schedule I think you all are pretty familiar with at this point. We're entering the home stretch. We're working to finalize the project list and the list of strategies. We'll be coming back to this group at the February meeting to talk through the strategies that we've identified for inclusion in the plan, and working through to actually just get started into drafting the plan, which kicks off full swing when we come back in the new year. On the next slide, also just want to note, we do still continue to have public engagement activities happening. We've had a surge in responses to our questionnaire, so we hope to see that continue through the end of the year, but that questionnaire does close at the end of this calendar year. And the intent there is just to make sure we can incorporate the feedback in the conversations that we have around the list of prioritized projects as well as the strategies. So before we really get into the conversation around updates on the financial plan and the conversation of the proposed list, wanted to just take a moment to do some context setting and set the stage for that conversation. I think you all are familiar with the principle of prioritized investment. This is one of the 3 guiding principles in Onto 2050. And it centers around the idea that we don't have enough money to do everything we want to do. And so we need to make sure we use data-driven process to inform conversations and consensus building around how are we actually going to invest the limited funds that we have. So with that, I think on the next slide, that again, it's how do we target transportation resources to maximize those regional benefits? And as we go through this, wanted to do a little bit of like history. I think many of you are getting to know me pretty well. Certainly within CMAP, I am known as a huge planning nerd, and I am somebody who will cite federal regulations pretty frequently, which I think is probably annoying to many people. It doesn't necessarily make for a compelling argument all the time. It's something we're required to do, but it has a little bit of because I said so vibe to it. So I wanted to just take a minute to step through the history of this, of why these regulations are there and why this process even exists as we enter into this conversation. So on the next slide, it really goes back to post-war growth. Following World War II, the United States, and this is a familiar story, I'm sure, to many of you, but the United States invested heavily in highways and auto-oriented development. The suburbs grew rapidly and home ownership expanded. The car became the default way of moving through daily life. And for many households, this felt like opportunity. The system was opening up new places to live, new jobs, and new forms of mobility. There was a huge sense of optimism about what infrastructure could do for economic development and quality of life. So if we stop the story there, it's a pretty optimistic story. It's straightforward. If you build it, people will thrive. But of course, we know that that's not the whole picture. And as highway networks expanded, tensions started to grow. And so the same projects that created new opportunities also created some harms. And highway expansions cut through neighborhoods, often through communities of color and low-income areas that had less political power. People experienced displacement, a loss of small business corridors, and physical barriers between neighborhoods. At the same time, air pollution, traffic noise, and congestion became more visible. Communities and local leaders started to organize and push back on proposed routes and demand a greater voice in how transportation decisions are made. So we ended up with this real tension. Regions needed mobility and that economic growth, but the way decisions were made were being critiqued by local leaders and communities. The critique was that they were too top-down, that it was too much driven by the federal government and state government, and local leaders wanted a greater voice. And so that's tension ultimately led Congress to create a different kind of regional decision-making structure for transportation. And that structure is the Metropolitan Transportation Planning process. So in 1962, Congress passed the Federal Aid Highway Act, which required metropolitan transportation planning as a condition for federal funding in metropolitan areas. That is where the MPO comes in. It is a regional forum where state DOTs, transit agencies, local governments, and others come together to make decisions about transportation investments. MPO is required to use the 3C planning process. That's continuing, comprehensive, and cooperative. So planning has to be continuing, so it does not happen once and then just sit on a shelf. This is why it feels like we're always doing this. We have to update this every 4 years, but that's so it's meant to be a continuing conversation. It's not something we're writing into stone at any one moment, but more of a forum to create this ongoing conversation. It has to be comprehensive, meaning we have to look at a multimodal system, not just on specific modes, and we have to look at different types of impacts at community and regional scales. And it has to be cooperative. So we know that no single agency can solve our transportation issues. This is something that we have to work together to work in the same direction to make the change so that we can have that economic growth and that improved quality of life for everyone. So this brings us to Metropolitan Planning Organization and CMAP. So on the next slide, it lists what the main responsibilities that come with being a Metropolitan Planning Organization, or MPO, are. That's managing transportation planning process, which includes developing the RTP every 4 years, producing the TIP and the UWP, which we've already just talked about, allocating some of the federal transportation funding, maintaining the travel models and data resources, and in conducting an inclusive public participation process. And so I think like one of the ways to look at this is there's just a long list of responsibilities there, but it's like you can really see how over the decades, and again, this is really where the nerdiness comes through, but like as you look at the what were kind of like the different eras in federal policy over the decades since the 1960s, you'll see that as things like the Clean Air Act came up, that's when air quality conformity became a responsibility here. It gets plugged in and operationalized through our planning process. You see that with Title VI and inclusive public engagement requirements. You see that with transparency requirements and performance-based planning and programming. All of these things came as a response from a feeling that something wasn't working right, and we needed to figure out how do we incorporate that into our regional conversation about how we make these decisions. It's also worth noting, I think there's an animation on this slide, that some states choose to latch on to that MPO framework and add additional responsibilities to meet the context of the state and of the region. And so in Illinois, the state passed the Regional Planning Act, which is what merged CATS and NIPSI to create CMAP, and provided these additional responsibilities of really working to try to integrate the land use and transportation policy considerations, establishing frameworks for how to develop plans throughout the region, coordinating regional transportation efforts around land use, and identifying regional priorities. Again, the main topic of conversation today. So on the next slide, actually, with that, I just wanted to like, I had another slide that I took out trying to save you all some time and not expose you to more of my nerdiness. But with that, I just wanted to do that just to kind of like refresh all of our memories on why we're here, why we do this, why we keep coming up here to talk about these things. And as we think about how we're approaching the financial plan, the updates that Elizabeth Ginsburg will be sharing here in a minute, as well as the proposed list of RCPs, that's really like this history, this reason for us being here. Does have a lot of value, and I try to reflect more on that, and I'll try to be more or less dependent on citing specific federal regulations. But with that, I will hand it over to Elizabeth Ginsburg.
Sensitive. Thanks, Ryan. I'll be nerdy in a different way. Next slide. So, I mean, picking up where Ryan left off, I think you all have seen this slide many, many times and probably could recite it back to me at this point. But we do the financial plan because it is a federal requirement as a part of the RTP process that asks that we show that the region has enough revenue available to cover all of the expenditures that are envisioned and programmed in the plan. But we know that we don't have enough baseline revenue to cover all of the costs. So we do work to think about what additional revenues we could bring. And then we also do a lot of work on the expenditure side with all of you to understand what those costs really look like. Next slide. So back in October, we came to you with a unbalanced fiscal constraint where we showed that expenditures were far exceeding revenues. At that time, we were including all of the RCPs that had been submitted, so we hadn't gone through that prioritization process. And we also had some placeholders for different pieces of it, largely maintenance and improvement costs, and then some of the transit operating costs. And I'll really take you through a journey this morning of how we got from here to a balanced constraint. So next slide. The main thing that has changed since early October is the passage of the NEDA Act, which was signed earlier this week. Very exciting. But that meant we had to make a lot of changes to the revenue side of the financial plan. First, in regards to the kind of transit operating revenue piece, we included the authorized increase to the RTA sales tax. That isn't in place yet, but we're assuming that it will be in place by 2027, the first year of the financial plan. We also updated the previous forecast for the sales tax on motor fuel. This was already in there, but we wanted to better account for the COGFA methodology, the way that they take that slice of the pie outside of the larger sales tax revenue that the state collects, and also account for historic fuel price trends to think about how much revenue will come in the future. We also accounted for the new 85-15 split between Northeastern Illinois and downstate. As we may have shared previously, our models assume that future transit operating costs are really confined by the amount of transit operating revenues that are available at any point in time. So the increase in transit operating revenues that we are seeing from the NEDA Act will result in higher levels of service and therefore higher levels of transit operating costs, which will in turn translate to higher ridership and higher fare revenues, and it all kind of cycles together. So we're seeing those changes in the models. The NEDA Act also dedicates interest from the road fund and the state construction account to transit capital projects. While the fiscal year 2024 number, so the state collected over $200 million in interest income on these two accounts in fiscal year 2024, but that's likely not going to be the norm moving forward. Investment income like this really varies depending on the balance in the accounts and the interest rates of the U.S. Treasuries that the state invests in. So to be conservative, we're using an annual average income amount moving forward. But we hope to kind of continue to refine this one between now and when the plan is adopted. Lastly, the NEDA Act increased truck and passenger tolls and indexed passenger tolls to inflation. We have not included these new revenues in the financial plan, largely because there's not yet a new tollway capital plan to kind of offset those new revenues. So we don't want to say that there's a bunch of revenue available that wouldn't actually go to projects outside of the tollway. Beyond making the changes associated with the NETA Act, we've worked to refine and finalize a few other analyses, which I will take you through next. Our maintenance and improvement costs have previously been defined as the cost of maintaining assets in their current condition, and then the cost of improving those existing assets to reach targets. For pavement and bridge maintenance and improvement costs, we used the 2-year targets that were adopted this time last year, and we worked with IDOT, who used their new asset management tool, DTIMS. Because DTIMS provides costs for 10-year periods, we used the estimates to calculate an annual average cost for the out years in the planning period. And also because DTIMS can only provide costs for the portions of the system on the national highway system, we extrapolated those costs to the non-NHS portions of the system using condition data provided by members of our resource group and the National Bridge Inventory. DTIMS can optimize one target at a time. So we ran scenarios for the share in poor condition targets as well as the share in good condition targets. We learned, and kind of given the constraints of the constraint, the region can only afford to reach our poor target. However, this is in line with kind of a preservation strategy. So we can afford to prevent assets that are in fair and good condition from becoming poor, and we can improve those as we can reach our poor target moving forward. Next slide. Through our work with IDOT, we learned that there are some key differences between the estimates that are provided by DTIMS and the estimates that were provided by the spreadsheet tool that they used to inform past financial plans. Specifically, when IDOT was using the spreadsheet tool, pavement costs were calculated for all roadways regardless of the condition. So we could assume that all of the non-capacity costs of RCPs were included in that large estimate. In comparison, DTIMS only calculates costs for those assets that kind of trigger a certain treatment. So they gave us a smaller amount. And so we had to go in and add the RCP non-capacity costs on top of the DTIMS estimates. In order to do this, we used the asset life cycle and treatment cost estimates from IDOT's Transportation Asset Management Plan. And we developed a methodology that estimates the share of project costs that would qualify as maintenance and the share that would qualify as improvement. Because maintenance costs will need to occur even if a project is ultimately unconstrained, this methodology holds those maintenance costs constant even if a project is unconstrained. For example, I-290 is not being unconstrained, but if it were, the maintenance and rehabilitation needs of that asset would still be accounted for in the financial plan. Next slide. On the transit side, we worked with the RTA, who used their asset management tool COST to estimate transit capital expenditures. We estimated the expenditures required to maintain current conditions again, and then we asked the RTA to estimate the costs associated with reaching full state of good repair by 2050. This is the highest amount of spending that would even be plausible and is a pretty unrealistic goal. But using that floor and that ceiling, we met with the service boards and to better understand where in the middle it made sense to calibrate targets that could be used to refine the estimates. Ultimately, we landed on targets for each transit asset class that are informed by recent trends. For those assets that have been deteriorating or in worse conditions than they were previously, the targets aim to return the assets to their prior conditions by 2030 and then make progress through 2050. This largely includes revenue vehicles, so those vehicles that are used to provide transit service, as well as rail track, which is not pictured on the slide. And to calculate those, we used the 2017 to 2019 averages, which is when they were in their best condition in recent years. And those are the blue bars in the charts. Next, for assets that are in better condition than they were a few years ago, the targets aim to maintain these conditions through 2030 and then make progress through 2050. The assets in this category include non-revenue support vehicles and transit stations and other facilities. The 2030 targets were calculated using 2021 to 2024 averages, or the bars in the green. We feel that these targets strike the balance between planning for ideal future conditions and what is achievable given the resources that we have available. I just want to take a moment to say thank you to Peter Fahrenwald and Evan Logan at the RTA, and also Laura Heckel and Megan Swanson at IDOT for all of the back and forth and the troubleshooting throughout this process. Next slide. The last update we wanted to share with you this morning was related to our cost growth estimates in the plan. The forecast that we shared in October used our original cost growth assumptions, which were based on the National Highway Construction Cost Index. But based on feedback from the RTA and with their assistance, we incorporated a separate cost growth forecast for transit projects, which have seen different historic trends than pavement and bridge projects. We also incorporated the most recent National Highway Construction Cost Index data, which shows that costs came down slightly between the beginning of 2024 and 2025. This does not mean that cost growth is no longer a problem or that it won't be high moving forward, but it does give us a better indication of where things may move in the near term than we had when we created our first scenario. You can see the differences between the original forecast in light yellow and our current forecasts in green. But you can also see that all of these forecasts continue to exceed the kind of counterfactual 2.5% annual growth. Next slide. So as I hinted at the beginning, altogether, these changes we have made, plus the prioritization and decisions on the constrained project lists that Ryan will discuss shortly, result in a balanced fiscal constraint with $569 billion in revenues and expenditures. The constraint does show that baseline revenues are still insufficient to cover all of the costs of operating, maintaining, and improving our existing system, let alone to enhance the system to meet regional goals and program priorities. It is only with the inclusion of reasonably expected revenues, things like transitioning to a road usage charge and modernizing the sales tax, that any of this will be possible. Next slide. Now that we've kind of refined the constraint, and we'll continue to tweak around the edges as you all make decisions about projects and work with the RCP team, the financial plan team has also been working on the risk assessment, which I've shared previously is an exercise that we're using to identify and evaluate how risk can impact the fiscal constraint that we've estimated. We hope that looking at different assumptions in the plan and kind of transparently exploring their impacts can better support our decision-making and elevate strategies in the RTP. Next slide. In order to do that, we've gone through a process of identifying priority risks. I think we had about 30 when we began, and now we have 17 that our consultants are assessing. The assessment approach, they're looking at each of the risks independently and developing sensitivity tests to see what would happen if the costs or the revenues were to shift. And then ultimately, they'll develop some scenarios where they'll combine multiple risks together to see what the larger impact will be. They're also working to develop strategies that would help mitigate the likelihood of any of these risks and the impact that they would have. For example, on the next slide, One of the risks that has been identified is the impact of economic downturns over the plan horizon. For the sensitivity test, we've modeled that the region experiences two distinct economic downturns over the planning period. One that looks like the kind of pandemic-related downturn we experienced recently, which had a pretty quick return to normal, and one that looks like the Great Recession back in 2008 that had a pretty slow return to normal and a long-term impact on revenues. By thinking about all of the revenues that could be impacted by the sensitivity test, they're able to turn the knobs appropriately and estimate that total revenues could decrease by 9 to 10% if we were to experience economic downturns over the plan horizon. In turn, that helps us think about what are the things we need to do to make sure that our revenues are resilient in those situations. Next slide. We have identified 8 strategy recommendations that we workshopped with the resource group earlier this week, and that we'll continue to refine as we move into the plan development period. They include building regional consensus to make sure that projects are ready for federal funding, pursuing additional state and regional funding sources. This is really where our reasonably expected revenues come into play. Improving state and regional planning and coordination and using data to make decisions. Supporting local funding capacity to make sure that communities have the funds that they need to match additional revenues. Ensuring durability of transit revenues over time. Luckily, we have a bunch of new transit revenues, but we want to make sure that they continue to hold up. Focus on policies supporting regional growth. One thing that we're seeing is that the projected population decline by 2050 really does impact revenues that are based on the number of people or the number of households in the region. Streamlining project delivery and prioritizing maintenance and preservation efforts, which will both work to minimize the impact of cost growth in the long term. And with that, I'll hand it back to Ryan. Thank you all.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I just want to first echo our appreciation for all the work that RTA staff and IDOT staff had, especially Megan and Laura Heckel at IDOT. There's so much work that went into putting together this data. And I think like Elizabeth just went through a lot of slides, but that doesn't even begin to scratch the surface of all the work that the financial plan team and our consultant partners have been doing in the background in coordination with folks at IDOT and RTA. But it does, I think Elizabeth did a great job of going through and kind of hoping to paint the picture of how we're trying to put together a plan that recognizes the pressures we're facing in terms of funding and revenues, but also is giving us enough flexibility to still maintain our ambition and address the needs that we know we have in our region in a long-range planning process. But I'm excited about this risk assessment that we're doing. This is new. This is kind of innovative for an MPO to be doing something like this, but the intent is really meant to help us highlight with these assumptions where we try to give ourselves some flexibility and get that constraint high enough to be able to accommodate the projects that we have. There's a lot of risk that gets associated with that. And confident in the math, we have a lot of policy briefs out there that explain the reasonably expected revenues and how we got to those as being feasible. But I think it is really important to emphasize that our baseline revenues don't even cover what it takes to maintain, operate, and improve to a very low target our existing system, let alone all the enhancements that we know we need to do in terms of bike ped, ITS, ADA improvements, electrifying our transportation system, things like that, or any of the additional capacity increases that we want to make to the system. And so I think that's something that we will see as a theme that when we come back next year to start talking about the actual drafting of the RTP and the strategies that we see in there, it's going to be focused on kind of both sides of the ledger. One, what are we doing to advance these revenues? How do we get durable revenues that can help us achieve the goals we have? But at the same time, we know we can't just there's not an unlimited supply of funding available. We can't just keep creating new and new revenues. There's also the efficiency side of the ledger and how do we work to create a region and a transportation system that is more efficient and more cost effective to maintain. So that's kind of a preview into the conversations we're hoping to have next year. But really, really just grateful for all the hard work that Elizabeth and her team on the financial plan team put into this. And encourage, if you have a time to look at those policy briefs and when the risk assessment comes out, those, a lot of great information in there. But I think now we can move on to the regional capital projects. In your packet today was the list of proposed, the proposed constrained list of RCPs. Want to note that this is still, we're very much in draft form here. We're still having conversations. There are things that are changing in terms of more kind of on the minor side of things, but a little bit of like corrections where there are some slight errors or rearranging of priorities within different implementers. So that's happening. Those will continue to happen. But wanted to like look at the timeline here, just as a reminder, started collecting the projects in January, evaluated them over the spring and summer. We've been working to align project priorities with the fiscal constraint. This is where we are today. And we'll be working, continue to work with the resource group to finalize the list of, the proposed list of constrained projects, as well as the priority projects that we want to highlight and elevate in the narrative of the RTP. And so we will be presenting at MPO Policy Committee in January. That is like the same kind of presentation, abbreviated version of today's presentation. But then we'll be coming back to them in March. And March is really the deadline where we have to have a finalized list of proposed projects. Because then we need to be able to go on and do the air quality conformity analysis that begins in March and goes through April. And that'll need to be completed in time to release, or for when we release the draft plan for public review and comment in June of next year. And so on the next slide, just want to remind folks of the kind of overarching framework that we're working within here. This should be familiar to most folks, but this is again, on the right side in green, you have kind of the constrained list. On the left side in the red is the unconstrained list. And the idea here is that if the constrained list that's really like just what Elizabeth just presented on. We have to draw a line of where we think how much revenues we have available over the plan horizon, and then prioritize projects that we think we can afford within that constraint. And so that's what goes on the constrained list. And what that means is that in order to be eligible for federal funding or to go through a federal approval process for projects, you have to be on that constrained list. The unconstrained list, we kind of break out into two different categories. One is the kind of conceptual projects. Those are the projects that we know folks have some, or agencies are thinking about. They're projects that they have in mind and want to put out there for transparency purposes, but they're not scoped out enough or ready enough to actually be considered for a constrained list. So we park them there as a way to provide transparency and kind of help facilitate coordination so people have awareness that these are projects that are being thought about. And then there's the illustrative list, which that's the federal term for this, but it is if we had more funding, these are the projects that are ready to be moved over onto the constrained list. And it helps illustrate what that need is within the region or unmet need. And so want to just reiterate that this is a process that we go through on a regular basis, going into the 3C process and having it being a continuing process. So this is something that we will be coming back to in 4 years for a 2030 RTP, where we update this list again. And so there is that's like a primary opportunity to make changes to the list. But we also know that we need to have the flexibility to change it in between those years. And so that's why we've worked to update our amendment process. And that has been included as a link in the packet today as well. And I'm going to do like a very high level overview. But I do encourage you, if you want to see more detailed information, we linked to the memo that we had for the RCP resource group that goes into much greater detail about what these changes are, how it differs from past process, examples of if you have this type of project, this is what you would, this is what the process would look like for you in that situation. But just to reiterate, our current process through the RCP resource group and feedback that we had from the Onto 2050 update was that the amendment process was provided limited guidelines with determinations kind of made on a project by project basis. So we heard the feedback that it really took a conversation with CMAP staff to understand what needed to happen to make a change to a project. And so we wanted to provide more transparency, more guidance, so that you can be, have a higher understanding of what's expected without having a one-on-one conversation. Though, of course, we continue, we hope that if you think you might need a change to a project, you should, always feel free to reach out to CMAP staff and we'll help you walk you through it. But we wanted to be able to provide this guidance to help clarify it more. We also heard that there were limited opportunities for approvals of changes, especially with our change in definition and thresholds. There was a concern that, there's some of these smaller projects, we don't want to have to go through the major approval process that we had for the Onto 2050 plan. And so that is where we're putting forward the proposed changes. The intent of this is to simplify it for projects that aren't making significant changes and provide different kind of tiers so that if it's a small change on a small project, you're not being burdened by a process designed for major, larger, costly projects or expansion projects. So on the next slide, again, this is just reiterating those expectations, but working to create a more consistent and transparent explanation of how we process changes to projects, how they're reviewed, and how they're shared with committees like this one, with the MPO policy committee. And then we're also looking to try to increase the number of opportunities that you can actually make a change to a project. So on the next slide, there's way too much on here to actually go through and recognize that. Just wanted to have it there, so it was out. But I think we can walk through this. I think on the next, there's kind of like a animation type thing built into this. So on the next thing here, it's worth noting that with the previous process, projects still had to go through much of what this process is saying. It just happened as a tip amendment. So you saw it, and it will continue to need to be a tip amendment. But the change was happening there, and that was what was updating it. What we're trying to do with this is to highlight that there are still things that are just changes that are happening in the tip space. But for those things that are making changes to the actual plan, we're trying to provide transparency that this isn't just a tip change, it's also changing the plan. And so that's really what this means. It's worth noting that we still anticipate the vast majority of changes that happen occur through a tip amendment. That's what it's going to feel like. It's going to feel like how it's felt in the past. If we advance to the next animation here. So for a minor amendment is really kind of tied, it's tied to the tip process. So it's still happening at the same cadence or same number of opportunities as a regular tip amendment. The primary difference here is that we want to just be able to point to it and say, hey, this is different than just a regular tip amendment. This is this is changing the plan and providing that transparency and wanting to create an opportunity that we saw, it is happening. We saw just earlier today with Audrey's questions about projects. There's an opportunity to comment on the tip, but this is going to be an opportunity for us to highlight, oh, this is also this isn't just changing the tip, this is changing the priorities in the plan. And so that's the real change there. And this is also what we created to try to capture those smaller projects that are, have impacted capacity, but are not significantly costly or having large scale regional impacts to them. But then if we get to the next categories, these are really one and the same. It's just trying to distinguish that some major amendments require a conformity analysis and some don't. Conformity is required for anything that's changing or adding or removing a project that is expanding the system. So if you're adding an expansion project or you're removing it, or you're changing the scope. So say you had like you're going to add 2 miles worth of lanes and now you're adding 3 miles of new lane miles. That is like something that requires conformity analysis. This has been required before. Like this timeline is still the same timeline as before. We've still only done conformity twice a year. We're just clarifying here. There's a difference between if we have to do that conformity analysis or not. We want to provide more opportunities to be able to make a change that aren't just tied to the conformity calendar. So for a major amendment, this could be things that the major amendments that don't require conformity are changes that are on non-capacity impacting projects or on capacity impacting projects that you're not changing the scope of it. So if it's just a cost change, it would still just be the major amendment, not the amendment plus conformity. But yeah, tried to walk through that as quickly as possible, trying not to overwhelm everybody. This is still very much a draft form. We want to hear feedback. Happy to talk about it more today, but also happy to talk offline if you have questions, want to run through some hypothetical scenarios with projects you have, those sorts of things. Definitely would love to have those conversations with you all. I think wanted to flag one last thing. If we go to the next slide, you'll notice in the guidance or the proposed amendment policies that we've put together, we've put in this variance from standard procedures kind of provision in there. I think at the resource group, I kind of made the comment, this is like the break in case of emergency thing or like release valve type thing. This is just giving ourselves a way to deviate from this established process in the event that there's some kind of like unforeseen circumstance came up that requires us to expedite this and not go through the normal process. There are still some things we are federally required to do, and we can't bypass that. But in situations where there's a special unforeseen circumstance, there's an opportunity to work with CMAP at the executive director's discretion to say, hey, we need to make an exception to this process and be very transparent that that's what we're doing when we present at a committee like this and at MPO, but show that there is this release valve thing. It is, I said break in case of emergency, and a quasi joke, it's worth noting that emergency projects do bypass all of this. So if there's a project where a bridge, I'm not even going to say the things out loud, but if something happens to our infrastructure in an emergency situation, there's a bypass for all that baked into this that don't require amendments that can move forward to make sure that we address that situation quickly. So I don't mean this isn't meant for that situation, and we clarify that in the actual document. But this is meant for those other situations where something does pop up that, there was no way of foreseeing that it was going to happen. And this gives us a little bit of flexibility in that circumstance, because the intent of this is to provide something that is clear, consistent, predictable, to help make it all easier for you to know when something is needed. It is not meant to be something that is holding up a project, especially in an extreme situation where something pops up. So that's what this is meant for, is to be able to provide that flexibility. Yeah, I think this is my last. Oh, no, I want to revisit the timeline just as a reminder. Talked about this, but we'll be back in, we'll be meeting with the RCP resource group again in January to talk about the priority projects. Staff will put forward our proposal list based off of the regional evaluations, but then have a space for the resource group members to talk through that. We will bring that then to this committee at the February meeting, along with strategies we anticipate to include in the plan. And then the hope is that, well, not the hope, we need to make sure we bring that final constrained list, the priority projects, and the strategies to MPO, to the MPO Policy Committee and the CMAP Board in March, so that they have had a line of sight to it and that they're good with it before we release it for public comment in June. I think this is my last slide now. Next slide. Yeah, there we go. So with that, Elizabeth and I are happy to take any questions if you have them.
Awesome. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Elizabeth. Any questions or discussion items? Tara.
Thank you for that presentation. I want to validate that nothing about that looked simple. and thank you for walking us through all of it. I thought it was interesting too, and for those of you that don't like to geek out about this stuff, I think we all feel it with the inflation we experience. But what's fascinating is that the changes in costs are not tied to like the price of a gallon of milk, right? So the challenge that we have is how the construction for transit and roadway projects has the costs have increased much faster and higher than our gallon of milk, right? So that was, I do look forward to digging into some of those policy briefs. So thank you for pointing out that those are available. But it does show then that we're short as a region, right? And so that's why we need to look at the reasonably expected revenues if we want to achieve the goals of implementing these capital projects on the list, right? And that's where we need to focus. All right. Well, thank you for a very informative presentation.
Thank you, Tara. Anyone else? All right, seeing that. Oh, sorry, Audrey. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm definitely really struck by the fact that our forecasts do not even maintain the system in a better condition, but just the same condition. This looks like you had excellent data for 10 years from IDOT's data set, but what about all the county and local roads and like the full system that we have to maintain? Could there be a need to do a maintenance assessment for the entire region, including all the local roads, beyond just this view of, this lens of the regional capital project?
I have thoughts, but maybe you want to start.
Yeah, I can start with the math. We did include those costs in the plan. So we took the IDOT costs and then we kind of extrapolated them based on the difference in square footage between the NHS and the non-NHS pavement and bridges. And then we used condition data. So if the local pavement is in, I forget which direction it went, but if it, just for example, if it's in worse condition, those costs got increased based on a per square footage basis. Whereas if it's in better condition, it got lowered on a per square feet basis. There is a lot of work to do in the asset management space moving forward, and I'm sure that's what Ryan has thoughts on.
Yeah, I was just going to add that I think as we were going through this process, one of the things that were very clear is that just how much it costs to maintain our existing system, we have varying levels of varying degrees of reliable information on that. And so I think everybody's working to improve their systems for this. Like I think with DTIMS, it's a huge leap, and we've been excited to dig into that data for IDOT. But to Elizabeth's point, we had to extrapolate from that for the non-IDOT owned system. And I do, yeah, I think that is one of the things we'll see in the RTP narrative is this need to better understand what does it take to maintain. We have this incredible asset that is our transportation network that is, fuels our economy, that provides our quality of life, but it's a legacy system, and it needs a lot of work. There's a lot that needs to happen. I've heard, as we've had these conversations, like talking to Metra and in the bridges, there, just our regular roadway bridges, there's so much need out there. And I think we're hoping to look for opportunities that we can better understand what that need is, so we can more clearly communicate or articulate that need to our legislative partners in Springfield or at the federal level, and really help to make sure that we're thinking critically about both, again, to both sides of the ledger kind of a thing. We know we need more revenues, but we also know that as we're working to bring our legacy system into a state of good repair, that we are doing so in a way that is creating an efficient system that is hopefully less costly to maintain going forward. So yeah, I think that'll be something that we see in the RTP narrative.
Yeah, Kyle.
Just looking at the draft constraint list, I'm concerned about the number of expansion projects that are included on the list at this stage. By my count, we have 33 projects that are adding lanes to arterial streets, 7 projects that are adding lanes to interstates. And I hope that as we move forward in the process and there's further evaluation and we have this prioritization framework, we get some more information about the impacts of these projects on public transit and traffic safety. You know, all of us put a lot of work into the congestion management process, which I think highlights the limitations of roadway expansion as a strategy, and just in terms of meeting the goal of relieving congestion. But then also the harms that come with it in terms of traffic safety, emissions, and local impacts to the communities that these roads are going through. We also put a lot of work into the region-wide and county-wide safety action plans, which I think highlight how a disproportionate of our traffic crashes, especially those that are affecting people walking and biking, are happening on state-owned arterial streets. And now we're proposing to expand many of them over the next several years. I think a lot of us, or anybody who's traveled around the region, is familiar with these supersized arterial streets. They're not anybody's favorite streets to drive on. They're certainly not anybody's favorite streets to ride transit or try to walk across with your kids. So I'm just concerned that we're doubling down on that approach, which is currently limiting economic development potential and harming safety in a lot of city and suburban communities. So how can we make sure that we're thinking about those impacts, and then we're evaluating how this constraint list aligns or doesn't align with the congestion management process, the safety action plans, and some of the other planning resources that we as a region have put together recently.
Yeah, I first want to note that the change in definition and thresholds is one of the reasons why you'll see in terms of the number of projects, more expansion projects, because we removed the dollar threshold, and as long as it's over 1 center lane mile in length, it has to go through this process. And again, that was to bring us into alignment with their air quality conformity requirements of the RTP. But that is the main reason why you would see more on here this time. But it does provide, part of the reason of doing that is to be able to provide a line of sight that this is happening and understand that it's happening. In terms of the process, we did go through, and all of these projects have been modeled and using the regional evaluation criteria that we worked with the resource group and this committee to refine this cycle, evaluated those projects. And really the process was started with looking at that data and understanding where we saw high regional benefits, medium, low. Many of you will be familiar with that list because that's kind of the list we use to facilitate the one-on-one conversations with our implementing partners. But in the point of that was that kind of twofold. One, we do recognize for those smaller projects, some of them are not going to score well on regional benefit because they're more of a localized project. They're not, it's because of that change threshold that they were captured in this process, but that the scale of it and the size of it is not one that we would expect to see large regional benefits for. But that doesn't mean that it's not meeting significant local goals or priorities. And so that's what those one-on-one conversations had, a conversation around that, as well as a conversation around what their local priorities are and where we could see an alignment between regional goals and how they're evaluated with the regional evaluation criteria and their priorities. And that's really how we landed on the proposed list. Yeah, I think there's always going to be the conversation about expansion. It was something that came up and was topic. The whole reason why the congestion management process exists is because, again, going back to the earlier part of this storytelling about how this process has evolved over the decades, there was a time where cities were running into a low return on investment on expansion, and it wasn't worth the disruptions to the neighboring communities or the other impacts that would happen from it. So they created this responsibility for MPOs to do the congestion management process to try to figure out how do we want to deal with congestion and think about it before we go to expansion. But yeah, we will be that is, again, in the spirit of continuing a continuous process, something that we'll look to try to figure out how do we incorporate the CMP work more fully into the evaluation process next time around. But the timing of it this time just didn't really allow for it since we had to get started with this back in January.
I think Terry had a comment too.
Yeah, I hear you, Kyle, on that. And I think I shared the same, like, wow, there's so many on there. And I think it's because of the change of like what gets shown. I saw something on LinkedIn recently that FHWA put out that interstates are 1% of US road mileage, but carry about a quarter of all vehicle miles traveled. And so the timing from reviewing this in advance of the meeting versus looking at where we have ad lanes, it is a lot focused on, they're almost all IDOT District 1 routes that are intended to carry travel longer distances. They are limited access facilities where there is no access to transit, or for those of us that are working on those projects know that we're talking about maybe bus lanes or so on and so forth. So I kind of saw it as just a reflection of where we are, because we still have, like, there's just a built-in tension on this where we do need to alleviate congestion. We need to provide multimodal access, but also we need to move people longer distances further, because some of these might just have a state route name, but they feel like an interstate, so I share that observation you have, but I also see it as just a small category of ad lanes where, again, it's so many of the vehicle miles traveled and we're trying to get people through the region efficiently.
All right, any other comments, discussion? Yes, Audrey.
Yeah, just one more. Thanks for that, Tara. I mean, from what I know, the population in our state has been flat for 25 years. And I'm not sure what the population forecast is, but I don't think I think you said a decline in our population. So I think we need to also think about this in that context of, I realize we're talking regional capital projects, but are we also planning to do a comprehensive travel demand management in this region? Because our population isn't growing. Why are we needing to build so much, more roadway capacity? Are we building in the right places? It sort of begs the question of logic.
Yeah, I think we had Christina, and then we'll come over to Heidi.
As the representative of the fastest growing county in the nation in the late 90s and early 2000s, I can tell you that we have yet to stop growing in Will County. We are still working on projects that needed to be done in the early 2000s to accommodate the the growth that we've had. And as a resident of the village of Plainfield, we just recently are in the process of completing a special census because we believe our population has increased 10% since 2020. So while the region may have declined or has a flat line in population, Will County and Kendall County are counties in this area that have not stopped growing since 2000, and we have not been seeing the necessary infrastructure improvements to accommodate that growth until now.
Yes, Heidi.
I'd like to say also in Kane County that we're seeing a lot of very rapid growth and new subdivisions, and Randall Road is on the regional capital project list, and we are addressing with capacity continuous new or improved multi-use paths, connections to transit. The growth and the daily traffic numbers that we're seeing it's not going to be able to be addressed by pace at the current state of transit. So I just like to say there are regions that are parts of the region that are declining, but in Kane County, that's not our case. And the Randall Road improvement is part of the national highway system. It is a connection to our two tollways that run through the county, and it's been a long range plan for 35 years, but we do recognize the issues with pedestrian and transit accommodations, and we consider that with every single improvement we make, and we hope that this is going to be a much better multimodal use corridor, and that's the title of a lot of our northern Randall improvements is a multi-modal corridor improvement. So it's a tough to balance, but we do recognize the safety issues, and then trying to balance congestion with safety and access and travel. It's complicated.
Thank you, Heidi. Yes, Kara.
Yeah, I think one thing that would be interesting to look at as we try to marry the work of the congestion management plan into another RTP is, sometimes we're talking about every trip as if it's equal and every mile as if it's equal. In both this region and most other regions, the vast majority of trips, over 50%, are trips under 3 miles. 2/3 of trips are under 5 miles. And so, we're looking at each sort of project as if it's apples to apples, and we know that there's a need to carry people longer distance and think about that regional connectivity. But we also can think about the vast majority of trips that people are making on a daily basis and how we can manage and enable that mobility in an efficient way. And those trips are predominantly very short local trips. And I think that there's a wealth of opportunity in thinking about that and the role that transit plays, as well as the rest of our mobility system. And maybe that's the dimension that we can think about as we delineate some of these projects that are now coming up through this process. And I think it's good transparency for us to discuss, but we can think about the type of trip that serves compared to the volume of other trips that are also happening in the region.
Yep. Steve.
I think it's the other thing to think about from an IDOT perspective, when I looked at the list and reviewed the list, looking at just the interstates itself, there was only just 2 on the list that actually had expansion, right? One was the bottleneck elimination of I-290, which has been studied for 20 years, and then I-55 down in Will County. Actually, most of the expansion projects actually went to unconstrained. And really, when you look at the interstate system that we have, that from the IDOT perspective is over 80 years old, or almost 70 years old. We're just clinging on to what we have. And a lot of those that went to the RCP are really more state of the good repair that went above that 250 mark, because we have some very large bridges on our interstates, some of which, date back to 1956. And when you look at the capacity expansion projects of IDOT, well, we haven't expanded. There's only one expressway within the 294 belt that we've expanded in the last, since they were born, really. You look at the Kennedy, the reversibles were installed in 1961. We haven't changed it since then. I-290 hasn't been expanded since 1956. I-55 hasn't been expanded since 1956. The only expressway that we've expanded in the last 50 years is the Ryan. And this plan only has one expansion within that belt, which is 290, which is just a 3-mile expansion to eliminate that bottleneck that goes from 294 to 355. So there's not actually a large expansion project when you really dig into that. So we can certainly go, and there's going to be more discussion on this, but we can really dig into these projects. But there's not a lot. What we're looking at is really a state of good repair on this plan, and the list really reflects that, and I think really aligns with the condition needs that we see.
Yeah, I think Amy was up, and then Kyle.
I just want to set the record straight. The forecast does indicate growth overall in the region. It is a slower rate of growth than our previous forecast, but there is growth. And it is also true the growth is uneven across the region, and that's recognizing, right, changes in the economy and different sectors growing maybe at a different pace than others. So,
Kyle.
Yeah, I hear and understand the need to accommodate people who are traveling longer distances. And I mean, I think it's something to be proud of that we've had limited highway expansion over the last several years. And I appreciate IDOT's focus on state of good repair. And there's enormous needs there, as we've talked about. I just want to, again, emphasize that I'm trying to make sure we're focusing on the local impacts of these projects and weighing the need to accommodate people traveling longer distances with the impacts of those projects on the people who live and travel within those communities, particularly the arterial expansions. I kind of think the expressway expansion is kind of in a different category. So I hope, again, just as we move forward, that we can see some more data and qualitative and quantitative information about how these arterial expansions are going to affect traffic safety and affect people who are moving across all modes within those communities.
Anyone else? Yes, Henry.
Probably let you speak, but a good chunk, fair enough. I mean, we've always had a national challenge with capital funding for transit, period. It's just, we just don't have a robust enough program. It is exciting to see in this plan that there's infill CTA stations, that there's bus rapid transit, that there are metro improvements, and there's $22 billion roughly of transit improvements, and there's roughly 20-something billion, maybe all told it's 40 billion. I'm sorry, I was just kind of doing it very quickly. But there is a pretty good split here of transit. But I really want to just say, and this is really straightforward from the IDOT-MYP, the arterials are all on the periphery. It's all North Lake County. It's all Illinois 47 down Kane County, and it's through Will County. It's around the sides, taking probably 1 lane to 2 lanes each way. That's just the development pattern out there. I mean, we can try to pass state policies, but I don't really know if we want to do that. I mean, we've never had that direction. What we've had is complete streets. What we've had is new transit funding from our policy folks. This is fantastic. We all want a robust urban core, but we are not. This plan is not proposing new beltways of highways. There's no new highway corridor in here. It's reconstruction of 75-year-old interstates. It's small linkages. It is on those linkages. It is connecting all of the rail facilities and freight and manufacturing that we care about. But yes, we always need more transit capital funding. It's been a problem for 20, 30, 50 years in the United States.
Thank you. Yes, Audrey.
Thanks for that observation about the arterials being at the periphery. I think that just underscores how much land use and transportation are linked, and the fact that we have infrastructure here built for many more people in the center of the region. We used to have more people, and if we need to manage the costs of construction and maintenance, when we can put people next to infrastructure that already exists, that's the best thing we can do. And so there just needs to be a lot more prioritization of infill and transit-oriented development. And we just need to recognize that and continue to advance those policies so that we can reduce the maintenance burden on our transportation system.
All right. Thank you, Audrey. Any other comments on this? Oh, it's been a good discussion. One thought that I had too, and I've mentioned this before, but I see all sides of this too, and I think it's good to have all these tools and resources, when we're looking at projects, right? Is it a roadway project, bike and ped? Is it transit and what we have there? But, speaking especially for the counties and to Henry's point too, I mean, it's a very diverse region, right? So we have some areas, and McHenry has some areas in Will County that are, farms, and, there's not a lot of transit out there too, right? So, I mean, trying to get people access to buses and trains and stuff like that probably isn't an option with the funding we have, but just, keeping that in mind, right? When looking at the diversity of the region and stuff like that, there's some roadway improvements we need in certain areas, and other areas, I like Lake County in particular, we're looking at a lot of bus and transit and stuff like that too, and mobility hubs and stuff like that. So that's just my thought, just remembering just the diversity of the region and stuff that we live in too. Any other last comments, discussion? All right. Thank you, Ryan and Elizabeth. Appreciate that. Very good presentation and great discussion, and it will continue, I'm sure. So thank you. All right, moving on to item 7. Is there any other business that committee members would like to bring forward? Seeing none, we're moving on to item 8, public comment. Before we get to online, I think we had someone from the audience in person. Kyle Lucas. Yes, there you go. So Kyle Lucas is here in person, and then we'll jump to online comments.
Hello, good morning, everyone. My name is Kyle Lucas. I'm the Executive Director of Better Streets Chicago. We're a grassroots advocacy organization, and we advocate for better streets for people to walk, roll, bike, and take transit. I just wanted to talk today about one of the items that's actually on this regional transportation plan, North to Sabo Lakeshore Drive, and provide some context around our position on that. So really, since the inception of the Redefine the Drive project, the Illinois and Chicago Departments of Transportation have unfortunately systematically ignored the desires and concerns of the surrounding communities. And this really roots back to significant flaws to the premise of the project by design from the purpose and needs statement. And the project really has not taken into account investments in transit outside of the RPM project itself. And it only takes into account a small travel shed outside of the North Lakefront, rather than longer travel patterns throughout the region. And if you look back to public engagement across the life of the project thus far, consistently the feedback has been that people want investments in transit, cycling, and pedestrian features, and a general disapproval of the direction of the project. Better Street Chicago actually conducted a survey in 2023 that had 2,000 respondents that affirmed this. We found that 73% of those who took the survey said that the drive diminishes the quality of life along the parks. They said that 52% reported having at least one car and wanting to give that car up. 34% reported having no car. 70% said that they wanted to drive less than they currently do. And 55% reported that they want to bike more than they currently do. So we've been working really hard to uplift the public's desires around this project for many years now. And that's actually resulted in some significant movement even among local leaders. So for example, in 2024, Representative Cam Buckner introduced House Resolution 438. This was sponsored by Representative Williams, Croak, Guzzardi, LaPointe, Cassidy, Wynn, and Lilly. And this passed unanimously in the House. And the premise was very simple and very aligned with what the public is saying. Make DuSable Lakeshore Drive a boulevard and invest in transit and emphasize green mobility. Unfortunately, the project currently does not reflect that. There was also a letter that was signed by 14 different alderpeople, including the majority of those representing the North Lakefront. It said the same thing, calling for a reduction in the footprint of the drive and investments in transit, cycling, and pedestrian infrastructure. The Regional Transportation Authority leaders have also called for investments in dedicated transit along the corridor, which we don't see reflected in the current proposal. And most recently, the open house that was hosted in August of 2024, there was an overwhelming majority of feedback from residents against the project in its current form. Since then, as you all are very aware, we have passed historic transit legislation with SB 2111, which CMAP laid the groundwork for, so we're really appreciative for that. And so this is a historic investment in transit, but with that, it's also a regionalized planning that's paired with that. On top of Metra's existing plans already to transition to regional rail and latent demand that's demonstrated by where we're seeing ridership recovery on the systems, we believe it would be really unwise to not take this opportunity to holistically look at investments in transit across the corridor, including not just CTA with RPM, but Metra as well. Currently, this project is listed as a recommendation for fiscal constraint within the Regional Transportation Plan. However, we strongly believe that CMAP should not advance this project in this current form against the wishes of the community, advocates, transit leaders, local elected officials, and the Illinois General Assembly until it has been rescoped to meet those concerns. So I just wanted to share with you that all of you today in order to take into consideration in this process. We believe that, I've had a conversation with some of the people who are on the project team, and I've been told we're just trying to design a project that we think we can get funded. But we've seen demonstrations across the United States that when we dream big and that when we listen to the community, that we can do really exciting things, and we don't have to limit ourselves into the box of what we think is politically possible, when instead we actually listen to the people, listen to the community. That's where things become politically possible, when you listen to the needs of people and what they want, and they'll have your back. So thank you so much for the time today, and look forward to continuing to engage in this conversation with all of you.
Great. Thank you, Kyle. If you're online, please notify staff by using the raise the hand function, and then wait for staff to identify you before addressing the committee. So I think we had Garland. Garland, can you hear us?
Yes. Happy holiday to you. It's Garland Armstrong, formerly of Elmwood Park and Des Plaines, along with my wife, Heather Armstrong. How y'all doing in the Chicagoland area?
Cold at Garland. It's pretty cold out there today.
Yeah, it's here too, and the snow's melting here after we had some snow here. So just want to kudos to them finally for the transit funding bill for RTA, and definitely it's definitely going to be a good one, and especially for disability community to get some of the money they need when they go around, and including paratransit, so that they can have more of for the paratransit, because they need some more help in getting around in the Chicagoland area, and they're one of a kind. So I'm glad y'all are doing it. Hello, hello. And also to making sure that the ADA will not be disconnected. So y'all stay on top of it and make sure that there are some in different communities who cannot speak clear language. So have to communicate with them in their language. So make sure about that. And also for Metra, make sure that every, like especially on the North Central, that they have every addresses, because sometimes if the paratransit picks them up at the stations, they need to make sure what's the address going to be, so it can be in the paratransit system, because sometimes there's no addresses on there. So I hope you work with Pace to make sure, including the paratransit operations, to make sure you have all the addresses in there, and especially when they're going a little bit further up, they'll be ready when the train arrives. So I hope you can work with Pace. Metro will work with Pace paratransit operations, make sure to get every address in different counties where they are at. So that's all of that. And then also, I just want to give you all the heads up. My wife's birthday is coming up fast on New Year's Day, and also too, and as you know, I'll be back in the Chicagoland area in April for my mother's memorial. But we'll stop by and see y'all, and it's going to be so emotional to see y'all at the transportation committee meeting. So I just want y'all to know about it, and if you have any questions or comments, I'll be glad to answer it for y'all.
Awesome, Garland. Hey, thank you for the comments. Happy birthday, Heather, and
Yep,
have a
she's
happy
right here
holidays.
right now. She's right here.
Happy birthday, Heather.
Yep, and tell everyone, and also want to say happy holidays and happy New Year to y'all, and rock on, CMAP Transportation Committee meeting. You're immortal, incomparable, irresistible, and one of a kind. And we love y'all and miss y'all, and y'all take care and drive safely, and don't eat too much during the holidays.
Thank you, Garland, and you just warmed us up a little bit. We appreciate that. Thanks, Heather. Happy birthday.
He says happy birthday.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Thank you. And I think John Paul
Yes.
had his hand up. Good morning.
Yeah, and good morning. Good morning to all, to the CMS staff and the board transportation committee. I really appreciate the testimonies today. Both on the public comments, and I do want to say happy birthday to Ms. Garland. She's a Capricorn, like myself. We wanted to. I appreciate the conversations about the growth. I think a lot of people are wrestling with what is true about the population growth. I'm happy that the CMAS staff kind of responded to their understanding of the growth level and where we're at. But it's heavily debated. I know in Chicago, we have so many projects on delay, mainly because of HUD funding and some other kind of state appropriation issues. And it's just massive projects. It's just on delay, at risk to a large degree. I'm happy to hear that in the constraint report, both our Green Line modernization is included, and also, as we always expected, the 75th Street Railroad Grade project is in there. But both of those projects are two huge railroad projects, and what we hope to see next year or even in 2027 is for us to figure out a way to have CMAP work with us on the engagement of how we can maximize the benefit of all this rail construction. If it's industry attraction along some of our railroad corridors, or if it's housing next to our transit systems, we need that kind of collaboration. I know last year we applied, because we anticipated a lot of movement with our Green Line last year, and we applied to be a part of that technical assistance group for the 63rd corridor, but RTA didn't approve it at that time. But it kind of speaks to regional understanding of opportunities that comes up, and then what happens when regional leadership doesn't agree, and then it's an ongoing delay. So we want to kind of head that off, better anticipate what's ahead of us, so we can work as a team to bring about real reform and improvement streets and neighborhoods. I know one of the things we've wrestled with is this huge delay of getting transit-oriented development recognized in Chicago. We've been talking about it since 1985, and it's hard to even point to a few examples, and that's sad. And even when we had a momentum last year to move on at least 12 different corridors, even that got delayed. And so there's opportunity again with the RTA. They want us to pursue it more with this new initiative through the state. I'm hoping that can help get the ball rolling on really working as teams to kind of get some TOD initiatives underway. All this built up infrastructure needs higher density housing, much like what we're dealing with the Red Line extension. They're still trying to give us two or three story buildings when we really need higher density in these very capital intensive, alongside these capital intensive projects. And so your team at CMAP can help us kind of move those kind of finishing lines. But again, thank you for this opportunity to speak with you today, and happy holidays to all.
Yeah, thank you, John Paul, and happy holidays. Appreciate the comments. Anyone else? I think we're good. Okay. Moving on to item 10, if I can, for 10 more seconds. Sorry, I know we're all trying to get out of here, probably to trains and stuff. But when we were reflecting on our time over the last couple of years, I was remiss in my haste in mentioning and acknowledging the transit bill and the fiscal cliff, right? That was a major accomplishment and all the funding that's much needed and critical for the region. So that was just my haste that was in my notes, and I just kind of got a little rushed there. So just want to say that. I want to welcome Tara officially to be in the chair and say it's been an honor working in this capacity alongside you all. I think we got it there. You guys got it. And looking forward to continuing that next year. So with that, seeing no other business before the committee, do I have a motion to adjourn? Motion second. All those in favor? Meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Happy holidays.